Hello to everybody joining me. I'm Erin, and welcome to the Virtual Education Intervention Podcast. The name should give it away, but I'm here to educate, encourage, and entertain families and teachers who live and work with neurodivergent family members, friends, and students. And yep, you guessed it, my primary location for education is virtual. Sometimes we all just need a little more community, and we benefit from having people in our lives who understand how we live, how we work, and what our minds are consumed with daily. We just need support and encouragement within that space. If you're here, welcome to our community. Welcome back to the Virtual Education Intervention Podcast. This is our 5th episode, and I'm so excited to have been doing a deeper dive under the umbrella of neurodiversity. Our last few episodes have focused on dyslexia and the golden standard of the Orton-Gillingham approach to learning how to read or reading intervention when we have dyslexic and struggling readers. We're going to do a little bit of a pivot and continue under the umbrella of neurodiversity, but we're going to shift our focus from dyslexia to executive function. Now, executive function can really be categorized under ADHD or autism or executive dysfunction. This is a symptom, so to speak, of other disabilities. If you have ADHD, it's often characterized by executive dysfunction. If you have autism, a lot of times your executive function skills are impacted. If you have slow processing or other neurodivergence, even dyslexia, your executive function skills are often impacted. So while we might see more of an impact with ADHD or autism, executive function skills are really important to learn overall when you work with neurodivergent individuals and their families. So as I talk about this, I'm using the term executive function skills or EF skills as an abbreviation, but know that this can be applied across the board to students with ADHD, to adults with ADHD, autism, slow processing, learning disabilities, oftentimes even developmental or intellectual disabilities. So I'm curious, as our listener, have you ever heard of executive function skills? Perhaps you're a parent or an educator or a tutor. Maybe you're in school administration, or you're a grandparent of a student with ADHD or neurodivergence. Have you ever heard the term executive function skills? Whether you've heard this term or not, I'm sure, have no doubt, that you've used your own executive function skills daily. What's interesting about executive function skills, and we talk about it in terms of neurodivergence, is everybody, whether you are neurodivergent or not, has and uses executive function skills all the time. We notice the impact of executive dysfunction when it comes to neurodivergence when we look at ADHD, autism, and other disabilities, but we always use executive function skills all throughout our day. You can be in school, you can be out of school, you can be at home, you can be at work. We don't outgrow executive function skills or executive dysfunction as we get older, much like we don't outgrow our disability as we get older. Instead, we use these skills in different ways. The skills I need in school, the academic skills I need in school, and the executive function skills I need in school are going to ebb, flow, change, adapt, grow, and mature as I get older, but I will not outgrow them. I don't outgrow my ADHD. The impact changes because my environment and my expectations and my responsibilities change, but the challenges remain the same. I just have to adapt and pivot, and it looks different. There are elements of maturity, which is great, but the challenge remains. So, like I said, whether you've heard the term executive function or not, you have used these skills today. I would argue you've used these skills within the last hour. In fact, another name for executive function skills is the CEO of the brain. That's what we kind of call these skills. Before we begin, and before I get more into the CEO of the brain, be sure to follow this podcast on whatever major podcast platform you use, and also like and follow us on social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram as Erin Luchterhand Coaching, and I'll make sure that I spell that out for you in the notes for the podcast. But you can also access a wide variety of information on our website, erinluchterhand.com, or email us, Erin, E-R-I-N, at erinluchterhand.com. You will get me. Now, as a teacher, before learning the EF lingo, so to speak, I would often refer to the challenges my students faced as gaps. So if you're a teacher, if you're a special educator, if you work with kids, you likely notice these challenges that they're having. Perhaps you don't have the lingo or the language to use quite yet. We'll get there. But just because you haven't been trained in executive function, or you might not know quite what it means or the lingo, I can guarantee that you've noticed these challenges and you are likely working with your students on the challenges they face in these areas. Like I said before, as an educator, before I was trained in executive function skills, I would notice these challenges that my students faced. I called them the gaps, and I would say, we need to figure out the gap in your learning. I see that this academic skill or this life skill is challenging for you, but I know you can do it, but there's some kind of hiccup, that was another word I would use, there's some kind of hiccup happening that's stopping the information from getting from point A to point B. If a student was struggling to retain what they'd learn or follow their schedule or organize information, I would look at it and think, I wonder where that gap is. And I still recognize that particular challenges outside of the academic existed. I was determined to figure them out. Did my student need more visual cues? Did they need additional timers or more prompts? Would a different planner or schedule broken into smaller parts help? What was the accommodation that was going to support my student with this gap or hiccup, so to speak? Now I know that these skills are all related to executive function. I mentioned my past experience and not knowing the lingo because we know, data tells us that only about 13% of educators in the public school system have training in executive function or are aware of executive function skills. Now, you could have put me in with that 87%. I wasn't in public school at the time, I was in private, but you could have lumped me with that 87% of educators that were untrained in this area, even as a special educator. However, that doesn't mean that our educators are clueless. They're daily looking at the way that our students learn. Now, if you have really good teachers, if you have a good educator for your child, those teachers are observing your student. They're watching how they learn. And they're watching how they're absorbing and retaining that information, and they're looking for those hiccups in the learning, or they're aware of them. And so that's what you want in an educator. And if you are a teacher listening, kudos to you if you are one of the teachers that are aware of how your students are absorbing information, that you're aware that there might be gaps or hiccups, and you're doing the exploration and you're taking the time to do the deep dive to figure out what those challenges are. So I say that because I don't want any educator to feel as though they're missing something important when they're really trying their best. I do encourage you to continue down this path of learning about executive function, and we're going to start that path right now because I do think this will really help explain a lot and help your understanding of your students. And if you're a parent, this is going to help your understanding of your child with ADHD or autism or learning disability. It gives definition and understanding to what our children are experiencing. If you have a sibling, if you have a parent with ADHD, This is going to help that overall understanding. Now, we like to say ADHD kids are not lazy. They get the bad rap for being lazy because they can't just start something. We're going to dive into that and into why it comes across as an inability to start something or a laziness. We don't ever want our kids to feel like that's what we think of them. I met with a student just last week who said to me, I'm really lazy about starting my social studies homework. And when I looked at the homework in front of her, it was a massive packet of worksheets. And I could just see the overwhelm in her eyes. She didn't know how to start. And she had internalized this message that she was lazy for that reason. And I hated that feeling for her because I can just see her brilliance. And I work with her on processing through this and getting started and working through the academic component despite the executive function challenges. But our students are absorbing, our children are absorbing this mentality that they're lazy or they're not good at something just because their executive function skills are a struggle. So I've talked a lot about executive function. I've thrown that term out quite a bit. I've given you examples. Now, what is executive function? Okay, it's the CEO of the brain, Erin. What does that mean? When you think of a CEO, you think of a boss. Maybe they're sitting in their high rise, they're giving direction to everybody around them. That is what your executive function skills do. They're located in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which if you kind of put your finger smack dab on the middle of your forehead, you're going to find your prefrontal cortex. It's right in the front part of your brain. This controls the higher level cognitive skills, cognitive meaning brain, higher level cognitive skills that help people manage tasks, helps people solve problems and adapt to new situations. The lingo, so to speak, can include working memory, planning, regulating emotions, organizing tasks, impulse control, and we'll dive into some of these in a minute. But all of those skills that you need to complete tasks, to be adaptable and flexible, to be a problem solver, those skills are all housed in your prefrontal cortex, and those are called the executive function skills. They control things you experience and your ability to complete things. So if you think about life, school, home, social life, these executive function skills control all of it. So you can see how school can be impacted, but you can also see above and beyond school how home life can be impacted. Social life can be impacted. Job life can be impacted. It's not an isolated challenge to school. School presents certain challenges for sure, but it's not an isolated challenge. If you have executive function challenges, you're going to see that challenge spread across all areas of your life because it's managed by the same CEO. And maybe that CEO is just not quite as good at one of the skills as they are at the other, or as somebody else might be. We've all had bad bosses that probably shouldn't be the CEO of the company they work for. And the same can be true for our brains with executive dysfunction. But here is the important thing to remember. These are executive function skills. And I will die on this hill that skills can be learned. They may never be as easy as other things, but they can be learned. Sports, anything athletic like that, tennis, basketball, football, soccer, whatever the sport is, or whatever the academic content is, or whatever, play that you're doing or hobby you want to start, those are all skills that can be learned. Some people are going to be more naturally gifted in them than others, but that doesn't mean that not everybody can learn the skill. I am not athletic. I will never be a star basketball player or soccer player or gymnast, but I can learn the foundational skills to try. Right? I will never go be, an Olympic athlete in gymnastics, for example, but I can learn how to tumble. I can learn how to walk the bar or whatever it's called, right? Like I could go and I could get coached and I could learn the foundation of these skills. I'm never going to be Simone Biles, and that's okay, but I can learn how to do them. The same is true for executive function. Our students may never feel as natural in some of these areas, but they will learn the skills. They're going to learn them. They're going to get comfortable over time. It's never going to be something that's like a natural gifting, but that's okay because they're still going to be able to complete the skills and work on them. Now, let's do a little bit deeper of a dive. We talked about these being higher level cognitive skills that help people manage tasks, solve problems, and adapt to new situations. I'm going to list some specific executive function skills just to give you a little bit more broad idea. One of them is planning, making plans and setting goals. This can be school, this can be after school events, this can be looking at the calendar, this can apply to assignments, projects, and planning ahead to complete things on time. The next one is prioritizing. Planning and prioritizing often go together, but they are slightly different. Planning, you're looking at the physical act of planning when to complete a task and setting goals. If I need my project to be done by Friday, it's assigned on Monday, then that means on Tuesday I have to complete A, B, and C. Wednesday I have to complete D, E, and F. Thursday I have to prepare, and Friday it needs to be turned in. Prioritizing, which is the other executive function skills, being able to identify and prioritize specific tasks in the order that they should be completed. So perhaps I have to make my bed, but I also have a massive test tomorrow. Which one do I need to prioritize first? Maybe I make my bed because it's fast. Maybe I study for the test because that has got dire consequences, right? We face this all the time as adults in prioritizing task completion. But planning and prioritizing often go together. The other skill, the executive function skill that we often see as a massive challenge is organizing. Organizing your environment and your tasks. And I would take this one step further and say, and your academic skills. We often see challenges in organization with students in their writing or their math skills. So organization can come across academically, but it can also come across physically. So maybe a really messy backpack or locker, a room that's a disaster. They struggle picking up their toys or keeping it clean and organized. But I want to circle back to writing here. So if I hear that you have organization as a working memory challenge, then I'm going to expect all of those things to be true. I'm going to expect your room to be messy. I'm going to expect your locker or your backpack to be disorganized. I'm going to also expect that for that reason, because your messy backpack, you're probably not turning in your homework on time. But then maybe your writing is disorganized because you can't organize your thoughts. So do you see how executive function can really bleed into all of the different areas of life? It's not an isolated academic school event. It's across the board. A few other elements of executive function would include attention, paying attention and focusing on tasks, working memory, and I do want to clarify this one. Working memory is the part of the brain used to store and use information in the moment, hence the working memory. So for this one, think reading comprehension. I have read something, my brain, my working memory has to hold it long enough to remember what I read and to understand what I read, maybe answer a few questions about it. Or if you look at it in terms of math, my working memory holds the numbers and manipulates the information long enough to answer the question, but then it doesn't have to hold the information anymore, so it forgets it. Working memory, in life might mean, okay, I need to go to the grocery store and remember these 5 things. My working memory is going to hold on to those 5 things. Or I need to complete these 3 tasks. The working memory is going to hold on to the information of those 3 tasks. Now, what's important to remember here, maybe I'll do an entire podcast on working memory, is that everybody's working memory is different size. So think of it as like a sticky note in your brain. Some people have smaller sticky notes. Some people have larger sticky notes. The size of the sticky note is important because that's the amount of information you can hold at a time. So when you're working with students with executive dysfunction, you need to be aware of the size of their working memory. How much information can they hold in their brain at a time, manipulate, use before they've lost everything? Because if you fill up that sticky note too much, pretty soon it becomes useless. You can't understand or remember what's on there. There's no more room. So we'll do a podcast on these different areas of working memory and executive function, but that was one I really wanted to point out because it's one that I often see impacting dyslexia, impacting other learning disabilities greater than some of these other areas. Working memory is really important, especially when it comes to spelling, reading comprehension. So I just wanted to throw that one out there. Another important piece is this impulse control. It's another executive function, controlling our impulses and our responses. We see this often with ADHD. People with ADHD tend to struggle with that impulse control. Task initiation. I'm going to reference back my student that I had last week who said she felt lazy when it comes to starting her social studies homework. Now, we do know that students with ADHD tend to work well under pressure and deadlines. So as the deadline approaches, instead of working ahead of time to really be proactive and not stress last minute, their work is often better kind of under the gun and under that pressure. But that's different than an initial task initiation, which is being able to start a task when it needs to be started and complete a task when it needs to be completed. So task initiation and task completion go hand in hand here. It can be overwhelming to start a task when you're looking at a whole pack or to even know how to start a task. Have you ever wanted to try something, but the very idea of starting was paralyzing to you? You just couldn't start. That is often a challenge that individuals with this executive dysfunction face. It's not that my student couldn't figure out the information in her social studies packet. It's just that the very packet itself was paralyzing to her. She didn't know how to start. Sure, you or I could look at it and say, okay, well, we're going to read the directions. We're going to start with number 1. But it's almost this paralyzing feeling of, I can't even bring myself to begin. And that's different than lazy. And that's something that I really want my students to understand. It's why I'm a big advocate of self-awareness. And if you have a child with a disability, with a learning disability, ADHD, autism, anything within that neurodivergent umbrella, I find it very important and very helpful to have these conversations with them because I want them to know these might be my challenges, but I have tools I can use to overcome these challenges or to help me in these instances. And also, what are my strengths? We're talking a lot about executive dysfunction, but individuals with ADHD and autism and neurodivergence are also brilliant in so many ways. They look at the world differently. They solve problems differently than you or I could because of how their brains work. And so I always want that to be an additional focus for our students. Is yes, we have challenges, but also yes, we have tools and support. And also, yes, I have strengths. And so it's not as much of a focus on the challenges that they face. It's an acknowledgement of them, an awareness of them, and then the tools needed to support them, but also then Let's go be brilliant. Let's go change the world in ways that so many people couldn't. But I can see things that other people don't see. And so I'm able to impact the world in ways that others might not be able to. Okay, that's my little tangent for today's episode. But I have 3 more executive function skills I briefly want to touch on, and one of them is flexibility, adapting to new situations and considering different points of view. Self-monitoring, keeping track of what you're doing. And the last one is metacognition. And this is, again, another umbrella term under executive function. Some kind of call this like the mother of executive function skills. But it's understanding the way that your brain thinks and knowing what your brain needs when it needs it. Or another way to look at it would be strategies around thinking. And this ties with self-awareness as well. So this might be something like, well, I know I have a test coming up, and I study well with flashcards. Okay, that's a strategy around the way that I think. So I'm going to use flashcards to study. So that's just a little brief example of metacognition. But we need these skills across the board. We use these skills across the board in our academic life, our work life, our personal lives, our social life. Very often, neurodivergent individuals struggle with these skills. Oftentimes, that term, and I've used it already today, executive dysfunction, applies to the executive function challenge. So, how do we support our students, or perhaps even ourselves, with these executive function challenges? There are a variety of resources available, including strategies like body doubling, setting alarms to programs, coaching. But the bottom line in determining what is the most appropriate and effective strategy for you or your child or the individual you're working with is self-awareness. I said it before and I'm going to say it again. This is a big reason I'm an advocate for explaining these challenges. If a student has a diagnosis, I personally think it's best practice to tell them kindly but honestly. Even if they don't have a diagnosis, recognizing the specific areas of challenge can help them learn to self-advocate, which is the very first step to success. Improving, learning, setting yourself up for success, and that's so important. Ultimately, that's what we want for the students that we work with, for the children that we have. Personally, I think the goal of education should be to set us up for success in adulthood, to be contributing members of society that are able to care for ourselves and able to care for others around us. And if our children with neurodivergence need that extra support with executive function skills to be able to do that, I think it's so important to help them from as young of an age as we can to learn these skills, because the younger we learn them, the younger I start gymnastics, the better I will be the older that I get. We all, kids included, struggle when we feel like our self-worth is tied to a challenge or an inability to do something. You might hear phrases like, I suck at something, or I'm really bad at X, Y, and Z. I'd like to use the analogy that they may think they are a stupid horse, when in reality, they're not a horse at all. They're a brilliant zebra. So, and I had this analogy with my student last week. If you can recognize that you shouldn't be comparing yourself to the other horses, rather, you're a unique zebra who knows how to advocate for their own success, then there's no stopping them in life. I'm reminded of that quote that says, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's going to think it's stupid all day long. But if you put a fish in water, it's going to be successful. It's going to thrive. And that's what we need to do for our neurodivergent children. We can't judge a zebra by other horses, because if that's the case, they're going to think they're stupid horses. And maybe horses and zebras are too close. I like the analogy of the fish climbing the tree, but this idea that we need to ensure our students are in the right environment for them and that they know how to advocate for their own needs so that they can step into their brilliance. Executive function skills are cognitive functions that impact both life and academic skills, but we are all individuals, and each of us face different strengths and challenges. Individualizing support is important, and I am a fan of finding the right tools, support, and accountability to meet individual needs. Over the next upcoming podcasts, we are going to do a deeper dive into the different specific executive function skills I mentioned today. We're going to learn what they are, how they impact, and the research-based supports that can help. We'll also discuss how and why specific strategies help and the benefits of executive function coaching. If you have a child, a student, or you yourself are neurodivergent, remember we don't outgrow our ADHD or autism when we graduate high school, it just looks different, then I hope you follow along. Erin Luchter Hand Coaching is a mission and vision-driven small business designed to support you. As a team, we provide virtual intervention and education to break down barriers and create access to research-based tools that empower neurodivergent individuals. By addressing challenges specific to neurodiversity, our sessions foster growth, resilience, and self-confidence, equipping students and adults with the skills they need to thrive. We envision a world where neurodivergent individuals are empowered to embrace their unique strengths, knowing that they are created on and for a purpose. Through innovative virtual intervention, we strive to build a future where every learner feels valued, capable, and confident, while fostering a shared joy in the journey of growth, discovery, and success.